Okay, Monday night shir, here we are. And tonight's shir is graciously sponsored by an old Talmud actually, who listens to the shirim up in the Northeast. And this shir is Li'ilui Nishmas, his Zayda, Menachem Mendel Shalom ben Moshe Zelig. May the neshama have an aliyah. May the neshama have tremendous nachas from the family below. May be a gute ois better for Chol Mili de Meitav, for the Eineklach and for Gans Chal Yisrof Ali Yidin. Rav Osher Weiss tackles the Rameh MiFano. That is the title of the shir. Rav Osher Weiss is one of the great Rabbanim today in Eretz Yisrael. And we've quoted him many times throughout the shirim. He's a great Marbitz Torah, a great Posek, great Talmud Chacham, of course, doesn't need our endorsement. However, he also is known not to hesitate to ask kashas on poskim from earlier generations. If he feels he has a legitimate kasha, legitimate pircha, he won't hesitate to state it. And in tonight's discussion, he takes issue. He has a kasha on something from the Rameh MiFano, the great Menachem Azariah Fano, and we want to defend our good friend, so to speak. The Rameh MiFano may be horrified to hear we're calling him our friend. He's not our friend, but he's a regular at the shiurim. We could almost have a chair for him. You know, it's like by the Ushpizin. The Chidah had a minute to have empty chairs for the Ushpizin in the Sukkah. And an old Yid once saw this and he came to the Abter Rebbe, Rabbi Avram Yeshua Heschel of Abter, the Abter Dov, and told him that the meaning of the Chidah was to have chairs empty so that the Ushpizin could sit. And the Abter Rebbe said, "Oh, if I only came to this world to hear this, it was already worth it." Anyhow, so the Rameh MiFano almost sits by our shiurim. We've quoted him so often. But he's far from a friend. The man was an angel. The man was no man, he was an angel. If you just observe how he's quoted by later generations, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was a great rationalist and was a free thinker and not afraid to state his mind, and he calls out many rabbis, but when he speaks about Rabbi Menachem Azariah Fano, it's with the greatest respect and titles. He refers to him as the king of Kabbalah. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was a great Kabbalist too, he labels the Rameh MiFano the king of Kabbalah. Rabbi Lozer Fleckels was a student of the Noide Yehuda in Prague. The Tshuva Ma'ava sounds like a Chassidic name of a sefer. He was far from a Chassid. The Tshuva Ma'ava was no Chassid at all. He was definitely not. In fact, he has a letter where he praises the local monarch for not allowing the Zohar to be printed. That's right. And he writes, "I have no problem with Rashbi, I just don't think the Zohar is from him." So he was, but nonetheless, when he quotes the Rameh MiFano, he says, "I saw light, Ra'isi Be'isha Leikim Kaddish," all these titles. It's like no matter what your background is, Rabbi Menachem Azariah Fano is like untouchable. He was born in 1548, passed away in 1620. And we spoke about in many of the shurim. In fact, we had a whole shir dedicated to him. If he had a beard, the whole controversy with the beard of the Rameh MiFano. But the Chidah writes in his Machzik Bracha on Shulchan Aruch that the Rameh MiFano, whatever he says in Kabbalah or in Nigla, his words are pure, they're holy, they're like untouchable, unquestionable. And we're going to see something that he says, which Rav Osher Weiss takes issue with, and we'll see if we can defend and release the Rameh MiFano from from those that question him. Tonight's topic is about ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, not mixing one joy with another joy. It's related to this week's parsha. How so? I'll tell you in a minute. Not so fast. I'm going to begin with a story. It's a well-known story. I'm going to start with the story, and this story will come back again later in the shir because it may shed light on something. The story is found in Sipuri Chassidim from Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevens. He's quoting it. A well-known story about Rab Meir Premishlan. Rab Meir Premishlan was a great Chassidic Rebbe, times of the Tzemach Tzedek. And it was once on Simchas Torah by a kafis that he was told that his daughter was extremely, extremely ill. And the Chassidim said, Rebbe, is there something that we can do? All hope is basically lost. So number one, we have the tzaddik enters into the room of the girl, v'yada, and he understood what was happening with her. So he left the room and he said the following. He said, Rebbeinu Shalom, said Eibishter, tzivisa litkaya b'shofar b'Rosh Hashanah. You instructed me to blow shofar in Rosh Hashanah. V'taka meirel, and meirel blew. Tzivisa, you instructed us Yidden to fast on Yom Kippur, and Meirel fasted. You instructed us to sit in Sukkah, on Sukkahs, and Meirel sat in the Sukkah. On Simchas Torah, you instruct us, your mitzvah, to be happy, to be freilich, and Meirel is happy. But now you have made Bito Shel Meir Chalonis, you've made Meirel's daughter very ill. And Meirel needs to be makabel this besimcha. This news you have to accept with joy, because it says in Brachas, Chayev Adam Levarach Ala Ra Kishem Shemevarach Ala Tova. One is chayev to bench for the bad, just like he's chayev to bench for the good. Right? There's Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv, there's Shechianon, there's Baruch Dayan Oemes, Brachas, but they're all benching Hashem. And the same way, now it says, the Mishnah says, the same way you chayiv to bench ala ra, the same way you chayiv to bench ala tova, you're also chayiv to bench al hara. And the Gemara wants to know, what's the pshat, what's the similarity between the two? Just say you chayiv to bench on the good things, and you chayiv to make another bracha, dayan emes, on the bad things. What does it mean, kishem, like there's a similarity between the two brachas? So the Gemara Taka says, "L'kibuli b'simcha." There is a similarity that when one makes dayan or emes, there may be a broken heart, but one has to strive to be makabel b'simcha with joy. So Rav Meir Premishlan says, Eibishter, what you're doing now to my daughter requires me to bench her. And the Gemara says, "L'kabel b'simcha." The problem is it's Simchas Torah, so I'm already happy. It's ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. So, v'lochin mekabel meil b'simcha. You're giving me this tragedy with my daughter, but I have to mekabel b'simcha. I'm ready to do that. Aber Rebbeinu Shalom, there's a halacha psuka, ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. I'm ready to accept what you're doing to my daughter, and not only I'll make a bracha, dayan or emes, and I'll justify. I'll be matchtik the din, I'll justify what God's doing. No, I'll be makabel b'simcha. But it's Simchas Torah. You can't mix one joy with another. That was his taina. Now, is some kind of joke? It's not a joke at all. He's telling the Eibishter that this is where I find it hard. I'm unable. It's not that I'm unable to accept what you're doing to my daughter, but I'm unable to be besimcha the way you desire, because I run into your own rule that you've given us. You can't mix two simchas together. What happened right of miyad? The girl started to sweat, a tremendous amount of sweat, and she recovered from the illness. So the Abish responded, you're right, you can't mix the two simchas, so I have to heal your daughter. Nebuchi. Okay, so how does this relate to this week? You'll see this story will come back later on in the shir, so don't leave before it does. If you haven't heard how the story ties into the shir, it means you're leaving early. In number one, in number two on the top left, there is a Mishnah in Moed Katan. A well-known Mishnah, Ein Noisin Noshim B'Moed. This relates to this week's parsha. How? We're going to see right now. There is another set. It's only one page, Rabbi Amar. Ein Noisin Noshim B'Moed. You don't marry women on Yom Tov. Chol Moed. Yom Tov itself, that would be like a kinyan, an acquisition. We don't do that on Shabbos or Yom Tov. But Chol Moed, you would think, why not? What a great time to get married, Chol Moed. No, so the Mishnah says you can't. Loi besulas v'loi almanos. It doesn't matter if it's first marriage, second marriage. V'loi meyabmin. You can't even do yibum. The Kiddush of yibum is two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven passes away without children, so his brother has a mitzvah to do yibum to Reuven's wife. And the brother assumingly passed away earlier. So Matan Torah, Shimon and his sister-in-law are already bound. They're already bound with each other. She's also deraisa, an Isser deraisa for her to be with another man. She's bound to him. So you would think all they're really doing is closing the deal. Doesn't matter. They can't do it on Yom Tov either. Mipnei because shesimcha hilai, because it's joyful, right? It's joyful. As if without the Mishnah you would think, I don't know what you would think. But the Mishnah says because it's joyful for you, therefore you shouldn't do it. What does that mean? Because it's joyful, therefore there's no better time than Yom Tov. Now the Poskim discuss that under the chuppah, besides for the Sheva Brachas Rameh, that's already the Nisuin. But the beginning of the ceremony under the chuppah is the Kiddushin. We do them both one after the other, the Kiddushin, then the Nisuin. So by the Kiddushin there's also a bracha, the Birchas, the bracha of Arayos. But why is Shechianu not made? You're performing a mitzvah you never performed before. You make a Shechianu in every mitzvah that comes mizman l'zman from time to time. Marriage! Hopefully you only do it once. You should make a Shechianu. So there's a number of theories about why not. So some poskim say Shechianu, you should make Dayan Ha'emes. I'm being serious. You should make Dayan Ha'emes. Nechais Darga, the Gemara says, a chassan from the word Nechais, to go down. Anyhow, but that's, marriage is a great thing. The Mishnah says clearly it's a simcha, right? The Mishnah says black and white, simcha hilay, it's a joy. The Shah is, what does that mean? So what if it's a simcha? So we'll see. That's the Gemara Shah, the Gavaldik. The Mishnah continues, Avo machzir hu is grushasa. One can remarry their grusha. That they are allowed to do because it's a beautiful thing. By the way, the Sfarim say Kabbalistically, when someone is machzir their grusha, it heralds in the days of Mashiach, because that's really what Yemais HaMashiach is. The Eibishter married us, at least Kiddushin, the first stage, when he gave us the Torah. But then Golos, we're like Bonim Shegolum Al Shulchan Avim, we've been exiled, been sent away. It's almost like we've been divorced from the Eibishter. Not mamish, but almost like we've been divorced. Lost in love, the Eibishter is going to reclaim us. It's like machzir grushasa. So it's actually a big mitzvah. It's a big mitzvah, but it's not considered something new. You're remarrying the same woman. It's not a hischadshus. The thrill. It doesn't have the same thrill. So you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov. There's a Klei Yoker and others that say that when we say that marriage is like Kriyas Yamsuf, it's like machzir grushasa. That's the specific shidduch, because by Kriyas Yamsuf the water was together, then it splits, then it comes back together. So it's just like someone that's married and then divorced and remarries. So when we compare shidduchim, the zivug sheni, second marriage, to the splitting of the sea, the Klei Yoker said that specifically when you remarry your old wife, then it's mamish similar to Kriyas Yamsuf. Either way, but because the thrill is not there, because you've been there, done that. Very nice to get back together, obviously. You're allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Fine, that's the Mishnah. So number 5. Join me in number 5. The Gemara in Moed Katan. Oh, no. The Gemara that I need is actually not on the page. You guys are lucky, that's one source missing. The Gemara in Mohit Katan on Chesam and Beis wants to know, the Gemara asks, you're telling me that you shouldn't marry a woman on Yom Tov because it's a Simcha? So what if it's a Simcha? Azvah, so what if it's a Simcha? Fakert, if it's a Simcha, it's a great time. So the Gemara brings a number of issues. One of them is the Shit of Shmuel. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You don't mix one joy with another joy. You don't mix one joy with another joy. There's another reason. The pasuk says, "V'samachta b'chagecha." You should be happy with your Yom Tov, and we learn out from there, "V'loi b'ishtecha," not with your wife. Now that can be completely misconstrued. I can already see on your face that it means on Yom Tov you forget about your wife. Fakert. There's a chiyuv to be mesameach your wife on Yom Tov. What the Gemara means is that on Yom Tov you should be able to focus on the simcha of Yom Tov, not be pulled away because you just got married and you have a new wife and you're busy being besimcha with her. V'samachta b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha doesn't mean to ignore your wife on Yom Tov. It means if you take a new wife on Yom Tov, your mind will be completely distracted from Yom Tov. You have to focus on Yom Tov. But the first reason the Gemara quotes from Shmuel is Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. So number 5 is the Gemara in Moed Katan on Daf Tes, where the Gemara says, hang on a second. This idea of Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha minalan, how do we know this? Dichsiv says the Gemara number 5, the second line, Vayash Shloime beis ahi yesachog. Shloime, when Shloime built the first Beis HaMikdash, so they celebrated for 7 days. It was Sukkot time, but they started 7 days before Sukkot. So Shloime at that time, there was a Chav V'chol Yisrael Imoi, all the Yidden Kahal Gadol from Levoi Hamas ad Nachal Mitzrayim, that was the borders of Eretz Yisrael, in front of Shivas Yamim v'Shivas Yamim. 7 days and 7 days. There was a 14-day celebration. The 7 days before Sukkot were for the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash. And then there were 7 days of Yom Tov. Altogether, 14 days. They ate on Yom Kippur. Yes. Yeah. Don't get any ideas. Yeah. So says the Gemara, the im isa, but if it's true, the ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, if you're able to mix different joys with each other, so why did Shloime have 2 different celebrations? Everyone's coming for Sukkot anyhow, right? There's a mitzvah aliyah l'regel, 3 to shalosh pamim b'shana, 3 times a year. If everyone's coming to Yerushalayim for Sukkot anyhow, so let the 7 days of Sukkot be a double whammy. Be a celebration of Sukkot and a celebration of Beis HaMikdash. So if you're able to be ma'arv and mix them, let him wait ad chag, let him wait till Sukkot and celebrate both things together. A, everyone's going to be there. B, people don't have to take 2 weeks off work plus travel time. It's just easier. Do them both at the same time. Feed 2 birds with 1 spoon. Umevet Shiva, just do 7 days, chapping both for the Beis HaMikdash and for Sukkot. You see, you can't do that. Shlomo did not do that deliberately. Although logically he could have and should have, no. He couldn't have. Because you can't mix one simcha with another. That, says the Gemara Moed Katan, is the source for the idea of not mixing simcha b'simcha. If you look in number 3, above. This is from the Yerushalmi in Moed Katan. The Yerushalmi is discussing the same Mishnah from number 2. And the Yerushalmi says, Rabbi Ilav and Rabbi Lezer, B'Shem Rab Chananya, they say, why does the Mishnah say you can't marry on Yom Tov? The Mishnah says because it's a joy. What's the meaning of that? So he says the same thing that Shmuel says in the Bavli, Al Shem She'ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Sim, you can't mix one joy with another. Then Yerushalmi says, but this itself, where's the source for this notion? Rebbe loy shama lo min hada. Could be the word loy is a mistake. Rebbe heard it from here. The idea of not mixing 2 joys, because Chanukas HaMizbeach also Shivas Yamim. V'hachag Shivas Yamim. The Beis HaMikdash 7 days and Sukkot 7 days, like the Bavli says. But Rabbi Yaakov Baruch shama lo min hada. Rabbi Yaakov Baruch learns it from the following. Male Shavuos in this week's parsha. Yaakov Avinu works 7 years for Rachel. He is then tricked. He marries Leah, unbeknownst to him, in the morning, right? Babayker, boom, hine Leah. What a surprise. So he tells Lavan, what's going on in here? Lamari Misani, why'd you trick me? And Lavan says, Lo yeyasa kain bim kaimenu. This is not what we do in our place. The minig amokim is the older gets married first. Yaakov made a t'nai to marry the younger one. There's a big machlekes in Chayshemish between the sameh and the shach. If a t'nai helps against the minig amokim. So the one that says that it doesn't help is from Lavan, who said, no, Yankov, t'nai in, t'nai aher, lo yeyasa kain bim kaimenu. In our place, the minig is the older one. The other one could say, Fakir, look at Yaakov. Why learn from Lavan? Learn from Yaakov. Yaakov felt the Tanai would work. So if you look from Yaakov's point of view, the Tanai would work against the Minig HaMakom. The reason why Lavan won the debate is just because he put Leah in. There's a whole shaila, should have been a Mekach Toys. If Yaakov thought it was Rachel, the Kiddushin should not be valid. The Marsha asks, many ask, I think we had a shir a number of years ago. It's already a new crowd around who can start repeating things. But we had a long shir about a lot of details about that marriage of Yaakov to Leah. But some say that Yaakov knew that he may be taken for a ride. So when he was Mekadosh to Kala, he did it al das, whoever it might be. Whether Leah, whether Rachel, he betrothed her. So therefore the betrothal, the Kiddushim was binding, even though afterwards it was clear that it was Leah. Even that night while he was with her, you could say that he was unsure. Because otherwise you run into the big kasha. The Gemara says in the Gemara says in Nedarim that if somebody thought he was with one wife, but really he was with another wife, so it's a ben tumura. If the wife conceives, the child could be negatively affected because the father had thoughts about a different woman during conception, although it was a mistake. Okay, so some poskim say, well, that's only if the father was negligent and he didn't check which wife he was with. It was dark in the room, so I don't know. Do some find out. Whereas Yaakov did what he could. He gave the simonim, he gave all the signs, and it was Rachel who passed him off to Leah. So what do you want from Yaakov? But others say that another answer is that night Yaakov, it was dark, and he didn't want to speak, and he had in mind whoever it might be, just like he had in mind by the Kiddushin. Because otherwise you run into the shiloh that the Kiddushin shouldn't take effect. It was a Mekach Tois. But either way. So afterwards Yaakov tells Lavan, so why'd you do this, right? So Lavan says, because this is the minig. Bim kaimenu, this is what we do. I think the Beis Halevi says, Lavan was steching him. In our country, the oldest is the oldest and the younger is younger. I know by you like to flip things around. You buy the firstborn hood from your brother. Bim kaimenu, we don't flip things around. Others say fakert. Lavan told Yaakov that originally my older daughter was going to marry Rivka's older son, right? Esav for Leah and Yaakov for Rachel. But once you bought the firstborn hood, you sealed the fate upon yourself. You brought this upon yourself. Now Leah is destined for you. The Kabbalists say, by the way, the fact that Leah was there buried with Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah and not Rachel shows that in a way Yaakov was the Iker, Zug. Leah was the Iker wife, the Iker Zug of Yaakov, represented by the fact that Dafka they were the ones buried next to each other, Ma'aras HaMachpelah. We also had another she once, who was the Iker wife. Right? The Gemara has a machlokes if Ein Isha Ela L'Yofi or Ein Isha Ela L'Banim. Is the purpose of a wife to provide children or just to be beautiful for you, right? So Rachel had the beauty, but Leah had birthed more children. And there's a lot of discussion who was the Iker wife, but the fact they were buried together definitely is indicative of something. The fact is, Yaakov reprimands Lavan. Lavan says, listen, you want Rachel? Male Shavua Zois. Finish this Shavua, this week of celebration with Leah, and then you marry Rachel and you work another 7 years. So says the Yerushalmi Rav Yaakov Baracha, Lavan told Yaakov, you want to marry Rachel, all right? Not today, you got to give it a week. You have to finish the festivities with Leah. That's the source of Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha according to the Yerushalmi. And Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha is the logic, according to some opinions, of that Mishnah in Moed Katan of not marrying a woman on Yom Tov. You're mixing two joys together. Yerushalmi finishes, Rabbavu B'Shem Rab Lezer says, Mipnei HaTorah, which is also found in the Bavli, a different reason not to marry a woman on Yom Tov, for Chol HaMoed, because there's so much work that has to be done. The whole Yom Tov, you're going to be so occupied, you're working too hard. Yom Tov is supposed to be calm, leisure, relaxing. There is a Yerushalmi Grada that says the reason why Hashem gave us Shabbos and Yom Tov was to learn. You can't work, no phones, no business meetings, no buying and selling. Lo nitnu Shabbos Yom Tov L'Yisrael except to be Isaac B'Torah. But it's also supposed to be calm, relaxing, gentle. Hecher von Welt, meant to be pristine. And if you're going to get married, too much sweating going on, way too much schwitz going on. Worry? No. Anyhow, so this is what the Bavli and Yerushalmi have to say about the Mishnah. Both the Bavli and Yerushalmi say that Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha is a legitimate pshat and why not to get married on Yom Tov. You're mixing, you have a mitzvah to be happy on Yom Tov. What are you getting married? You're mixing two simchas. But the source of Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha, in that there's a difference. The Bavli said it's from the story of Shlomo HaMelech, 7 days celebration, and then Sukkot. The Yerushalmi said it's from Lavan. Lavan told Yaakov, Male Shvua Zos. If you look in the Ramban in number 4, this is Ramban in this week, the Ramban says that we learn two things from Lavan when he said these words, Male Shvua Zos. One thing we just mentioned, you don't mix one joy with another. The other one is that you celebrate for a week. Male Shvua Zos, you celebrate for a week, right? That's what he's telling Yaakov. Finish the week of celebration and then you can move on to Leah. In the Pirkei that Rabbi Eliezer says, this is where we learn Shivas Yemei HaMishta. The 7 days of celebration we learn from here. So the Ramban writes, right, and the Yerushalmi says we learn Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha, right? All these halachas learned from Lavan. So says the Ramban in number 4, V'ani lo yadati, I didn't get it. The Shivas Yemei HaMishta are takonos Moshe Rabbeinu L'Yisrael. There's Yerushalmi in Ksuvas. Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin the 7 days of Avelus and the 7 days of Yemei HaMishta. As the Rambam quotes, Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin 7 days of Avelus, for Avelus, God forbid, and also 7 days of Mishta, of celebration. I guess marriage is like the beginning of life, and Avelus the end. Okay, there's obviously a connection between these two things. Moshe was masakin both. But Ramban says, what's going on over here? Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin Shivas Yemei HaMishta. It's takonos Moshe Rabbeinu L'Yisrael. And then you're telling me it comes from Lavan. If Moshe made it up, how is Lavan telling Yaakov, Male Shvua Zos, wait out the week? So says Ramban, V'ulai no, maybe we'll say it like this. Shenogu behem etchila nichbodei ha'umas. The 7 days was an old aristocratic minhag. The choshev aristocracy in the Welt, after a wedding there was 7 days celebration. That was the minhag, just like Avelus was also the minhag. D'chsiv vayas la'aviv evel shivas yamim. In Parshas Vayechi, when Yaakov passes away, Yosef arranges Avelus 7 days. Says the Ramban, that was also a minhag of those days. And then Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin, made a takon. Azoy darf man firin. We need to do 7 days Avelus. We need to do 7 days of Yemei HaMishta. But it was an old minhag going back to Lavan. Fine. That's as far as the Shivas Yemei HaMishta. Umashalom du mikan nami b'Yerushalmi. You guys know the Yerushalmi. It's also in Bereshis Rabbah. She'ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We also learned you don't mix two joys. Smach ba'alma. It's not a doiraisa. It's not a biblical law. It's the Chachamim. It's a Chachamim's institution, not mixing two simchas. And they found this story in Chumash of Lavan to hinge it on. It's a smach ba'alma from the minig hakadmonim. No, taka, it's what Lavan meant. Taka, it's what Lavan meant. Finish it and then do that. But just because that's what Lavan desired doesn't make it a din doiraisa. There's many things that Lavan did, right? They're not dinim doiraisa. But the Chachamim decided it's a good takana, not mixing two simchas together, and they hinged it. Fine. So from Minhagi HaKadmonim Kodim Ater. Avli, but Gemara Shalonu, if you look in the Bavli, we don't learn Ein Ma'arvin Mikan, we learn from Vayash Shlomo. Okay, so what do we glean from this Ramban? We glean from the Ramban the din of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha is not a din d'oraisa. It's a smach ba'alma. It's just a cute story to hinge it on. The Chachamim made up the din. And so too, Shivas Yemei HaMishta, it's not like we learn from Lavan. It's a takon of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ein ma'arvin simcha is not from Moshe, it's from much later. We don't know. Very hard to know when each takon of Chazal, when and where it came. Matba was well after Moshe. But it's hinged on the story, but not that it's a din d'oraisa. That's what the Ramban says. Who disagrees? Taisus. Taisus in Masechta Ksuvas, and we'll see a Taisus in Masechta Moed Katan as well. Right, Mefudish, it's d'oraisa. Not to mix one joy with another is a din d'oraisa. The Ramban holds it's just a smach ba'alma. The pasuk is just a nice thing to hinge it on, but it's only d'Rabbanan. So it's a machlokes Ramban versus Taisus. If it's d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan. It seems from the Ramban that why would it be only d'Rabbanan if you learn like the Yerushalmi from Malei Shvu Azois? But if you learn from Shlomo HaMelech, I think when the Ramban says Avol b'Gemara Shalonu, we learn from Shlomo, he doesn't really finish off his sentence. What's the Ramban saying? It happens to be that the Gemara says, what's the Avol? I think what the Ramban is saying, but according to the Gemara you learn from Shlomo, it's not just a smach ba'alma, it's not just a pasuk you're hinging it on, it's pshat. Why did Shlomo make two separate Yom Tovim? Doesn't make sense. They're all coming sukkahs anyhow, do it then. It must be Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha is d'oraisa. Wow. You'll see the wows, you'll see why that's a wow soon. But first to address an issue that you're all thinking about. Look in the Yerushalmi in number 6. It's also from Moed Katan later on. Minayin le'evil min Torah shiva. How do you know that you have to sit shiva 7 days? Where do you see it in the Torah? It's from Parshas Vayechi, Vayas la'aviv evil shivas yamim, that Yosef arranged he and his brothers, they had an avelus for Yaakov 7 days. Ulameid in Dorin, you can learn something from before Matan Torah. How do you read that Yerushalmi? Ulameid in Dover, you could learn something from before Matan Torah, or is it a question? Ulameid in Dover, koidim lo Matan Torah? How do you read it? So it's a big machlekes. The Rif quotes from Go'onim before him that Avelus is one of the 613. Not only is one of the 613, all 7 days are d'oraisa. Because Yerushalmi says, we learn it from the story in Vayechi. And when Yerushalmi says, Ulameid in Dover koidim Matan Torah, who told you to sing it like that? You read it like this, Ulameid in Dover koidim Matan Torah. Who said there's a question mark? It's not. It's b'nei chusa. That's how these Gaonim learned it. However, almost all the Rishonim disagree and say the Yerushalmi is saying it in a question. Tosfos says Mefurish and Moed Katan as well. Ulameid in Dover, could you learn something before Matan Torah? You can't. And therefore, most Rishonim believe that 7 days of Avelus is only the Rabbanon. Moshe Rabbeinu was Masakin. The Shaila is the first day. The first day is a debate. The Rif and the Rambam hold that the first day is d'oraisa, but even that may only be if the burial and the passing was on the same day. The Rosh believes all Avedus is Drabanan, even day number 1. But the Rosh, the Rif and the Rambam all agree against the Gaonim that the Yerushalmi is knocking off the pasuk to learn from Yaakov and Yosef, because you can't learn from before Matan Torah. That's how, and Tosfos says, Mefurish, that's the Pshat, and that's how pretty much all the Rishonim learned the Yerushalmi. So then we have a contradiction between two Yerushalmis, both in Moed Katan. In number 6, Yerushalmi says you can't learn from before Matan Torah. In number 3, we're learning a din of Ein Ma'arv and Simcha b'Simcha from Lavan. We're learning it from Lavan. So according to the Ramban, it's no problem, because we're not really learning from Lavan. It's just a smach ba'alma. It's just a pasuk to hinge it on. But if you say Ein Ma'arvin Zadin D'Oraisa, like Tosfos himself learns, and we'll see, so then how could you learn such a din, a biblical din, from before Matan Torah? The Yerushalmi in number 6, the same Yerushalmi in Moed Katan. Yeah, okay, it's later on in the Masechta. But the same Yerushalmi, same Masechta says you can't. So, there are many theories in the Poskim about how this works. The Netziv wrote a commentary on the She'iltus called Ha'amek She'ela. And the Netziv says that, you know, when you can't learn from before Matan Torah, if there's reason to say that, before Matan Torah, those were different times. That was different. There was a reason why they would have done it. But who said it applies now? Nitna Torah v'nischad shalach. Once the Torah was given, things changed, because then was different. So the Tziv says you have to be able to explain why then was different. So by Avelus you can. Yaakov was so choshev, right? Egypt wanted to turn him to a getchke. So for the chshivas of Yaakov, he was one of the others, they did 7 days. So it's before Matan Torah, and it was specific circumstances. So you could say maybe then was different. But he said if you can't explain why then would have been different, then you could learn from there. That's his theory. So Ein Ma'arv and Simcha b'Simcha. And what are you going to say? That Lavan was so chashuv, so he had to finish the Sheva brachas of his first daughter before the wedding of the second? Why? Why would Cheshivas have his daughters were so chashuv, each one of them needed 7 full days? I don't know. It would be much harder to explain why that would have been special circumstances. That's what he says. The Shavus Yankov, Rabbi Yankov Reisher, one of the greatest poskim in the end of the 1600s, early 1700s, Rabbi Yankov Reisher in the Shavus Yankov quotes from earlier sources another svara. Anything which is like a choik, you see a halacha, and there's no specific reason why, just azoy is this, you can't learn from before Matan Torah. But something which is logical, something which makes sense, you can. The fact that you sit 7 days for Avelus, why? Why 7 days Avelus Mazeh, maybe 3 days, maybe 30 days, like what's 7 days Avelus? You can't explain why there needs to be 7 days for Avelus. A week is a full cycle of time. Okay, those are all nice explanations, but it's not something higyoni, it's not something logical, it's just a din. So the Shvus Yankov says concerning those things we said you can't learn from before Matan Torah. But Ein Ma'arv and Simcha b'Simcha is logical. The idea is that each thing that you're supposed to be b'Simcha with needs your full attention. It's a logical thing. Logical activities you could learn from before Matan Torah. That's the Shvus Yankov's theory. I'll throw in one more. The Kaftor V'Ferach, Rabbi Shturi Aparchi, student of the Rosh, big traveler. He say for Kaftor V'Ferach, he wants to know the exact borders of Eretz Yisrael and all the different dinim in Eretz Yisrael, outside Eretz Yisrael. So he has a piece about the Avos before Matan Torah, and he says that when the Yerushalmi says in number 6 you can't learn from before Matan Torah, is to create a new Indian. But to study and analyze how you're supposed to act, that you can from before Matan Torah. You can't create a din, like Avelus is a din. You want to create a new Indian, that someone has to sit Avelus 7 days after losing a close relative. So to create a new topic, a new idea, that you can't do from information that was said before Matan Torah. But to learn how to act, like Zrizin Magdimin L'Mitzvahs, you learn from Avraham Avinu, to do things quickly. or ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Or you learn from Parshas Miketz that Yosef had his sons before the hunger, which teaches us halacha. It's also l'shamash mitasa b'shnei oven. It's also to be together with your wife when the world is in hunger. You're learning from before Matan Torah. You're not creating a new inyan. You're learning how a person should conduct themselves. So the kafta that you can learn from before Matan Torah. Right, so there's all types of theories about what you can learn. So in order, there shouldn't be a state of the two Yerushalmis. Fine. The one over here, number 16. No, it's alongside. I don't have that part of the Sikha. But and these are old theories. The B'shtura Parchi was 750 years ago. These are alte Sachen. I don't take any, they're not my theories. They're old theories. They've been around, they're sitting on the shelves waiting to be read, waiting to be spoken about. Fine. So you have this idea of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. The Ramban says, according to Yerushalmi, you learn from Lavan, it's only a din d'Rabbanan. We hinged it on the pasuk. If you look at number 7, Toisus and Moed Katan. If you she'ein ma'arvin simcha, you don't mix two joys together. Says Toisus, Gzeiras HaKosov. You heard what he said? Gzeiras HaKosov. It's the Torah, scriptures, it's a decree from scriptures. That means it's biblical. Either learning from the story of Shlomo, or B'Yerushalmi Darish Midichsiv Malei Shvuazos. Actually gives both options. But Tosfos says it's Gzeiras HaKosov. Then Tosfos says, V'tam niriktsas. I think I have a logic of why you shouldn't mix them together. You guys are wondering, what's the big deal of mixing Simcha b'Simcha? Because there's a din called Ein Oisim Mitzvahs Chavilas. There's a din in quite a few Masechtas. Maybe you know it from Soita. Maybe you know it from Arvei Psachim. Maybe the guys that learn Brachas last, you know it from Brachas. Ein Oisim Mitzvahs Chavilas. You don't bundle mitzvahs together. Each mitzvah needs it to be focused on exclusively. Your mind should be open and focused for that one mitzvah you're doing. And you shouldn't be distracted. If you do a few mitzvahs together, each one does not get your undivided attention. It gets your divided attention. It needs to be undivided attention. Each mitzvah. So says Tosfos, that's the logic of Ein Oisim Mitzvahs Chavilas. By the way, in Masechta Soita, Tosfos gives a different reason for Ein Oisim Mitzvahs Chavilas, which is, if you do so many together, it looks like you're trying to get rid of them as fast as you can. It looks like you're uninterested. It's a different idea. That's like you just want to get the job over as fast as you can because it's a burden. Here is saying it's because you can't give each one the proper attention it deserves. It's not the same reason. But either way, says Tosfos, this vort of giving each one his proper attention is the same underlying svara for the two simchas. So to simcha b'simcha, your heart needs to be completely open and focused to one simcha at a time. If you do it together, you're nishtahin nishtaher. That's what Tosfos says. This Tosfos is a little questionable. He starts off saying it's a decree from Scripture, Gzeiras HaKosov, and then he starts looking for a reason. And not just that, he compares it to Ein Oisim Mitzvahs Chavilas. That's for sure a din d'Rabbanan. Not doing a few mitzvahs like being mashka two saitis at the same time, or being matar too much aroim at the same time. The idea of not piling mitzvah top of it is rabbinic. The reason is Chachamim want you to give each mitzvah your undivided attention. And Tosfos is saying the same thing by Ein Ma'arvin Simcha b'Simcha. It sounds like it's only rabbinic concern. But he starts off by saying Gzeiras HaKosov. So some have asked that this Tosfos seems to be a contradiction. L'chayra, based on the Ramban we just saw, you can answer very simple. Tosfos starts off by saying, it's a Gzeiras HaKosov if you learn from the pasuk of Shlomo. But the Yerushalmi learns from Malei Shvuazos. But that's only d'Rabbanan. And then I'll tell you why the Chachamim made that takana. You hear this? I don't know if it's true. With the Ramban, it fits very well. Tosfos was very cryptic, but at least it makes it not a contradiction. And it's not a Beichsvot, it seems to be the Ramban's opinion. Fine. So you have this idea, ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, that Ramban holds as Drabanan. Tosfos begins by saying it's deraisa. Tosfos in Masechta Ksuvas Daf Mem Zayin says mefurish ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha is deraisa. So there he clearly holds it's deraisa. Very serious. So one of the very interesting questions that came up is the following. In number 8, the Rashba was asked a question. Oid Shalta, says the Rashba, you asked me a question. Are you allowed to get married on Purim? What better day to get married than Purim? Right? The dancing, could you imagine the dancing? All the guests will come in already, shikr, it'll be gewaldig. Nebuch for the chosen, you don't get shikr by your wedding, so... But listen, if you're making a big suda anyhow, if the mother's making a big suda anyhow for Purim, let it be the wedding suda. It's a great day, you don't work on Purim anyhow. It's a great day, your mazel is strong on Purim. So, Kivan the Kaimel on the Rashba says, what's the shayla? Since the Mishnah says, Ein noisin isha b'moy, you don't get married on Yom Tov. Because Ein ma'arvin simcha, and the Gemara says you don't mix two simchas. High time and namish on Purim. That applies on Purim. It says on Purim it's days of joy. Da simcha, b'simcha. It says about Purim it's yemei mishta v'simcha. There's a chiv to be happy on Purim. Chanukah, there's a debate. Right? That's why Kislev, everyone's in a bad mood, because Chanukah is not the same as Purim. Well, let's see. But Purim definitely is it's funny because Chanukah, we always greet each other, Freilich and Chanukah, Freilich and Chanukah. But according to most opinions, there's no mitzvah of Simcha on Chanukah. But the Maharshal, the Bach, the Maharshal believes that there is a mitzvah to be happy on Chanukah. And the Shalor writes that whenever the Maharshal is machmir on the Rameh, one should be machmir like the Maharshal. So the Rameh holds there's no chiv of Simcha on Chanukah, only Purim. But the Maharshal holds there's a mitzvah, there's no obligation, you got to be happy. So according to the Shalor, whenever the Maharshal is machmir on the Rameh, you go like the Maharshal. One ought to be machmir, so you're supposed to be happy on Chanukah, and that's why we say Freilich and Chanukah. Okay, it sounds like a Purim Torah, but that's it. Okay. But Purim is for sure you may mishta v'simcha. So simcha b'simcha, getting married on Purim, you're mixing two simchas. V'simcha mishta kibilu alayu. Mordechai originally said, let's make it a day of mishta, simcha, and Yom Tov, right? And the Yidden said, we like the mishta and simcha part, but let's not make it a Yom Tov. That's what the Gemara says in Megillah. Right, because first the Pasuk says Yom Tov, and then it doesn't. Because Mordechai asked him, the Yidden said, no Yom Tov. But mishta and simcha is a good idea. So tshuva, the Rashba says, here's my opinion. Mistabra, I think it's mutter. And he says, because v'samachta b'chagecha ksiv b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha. One of the reasons brought to Masechta Moed Katan, I had made a copy, but somehow didn't get on the paper, was not that ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, but a reason which is slightly different. V'samachta b'chagecha, you should focus on the Yom Tov, b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha. We mentioned before that it's not the exact same thing. It's the focus. It sounds similar. Rashi on the Rif, which is not written by Rashi, says the difference is like this. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha means that you shouldn't mix any simcha onto Yom Tov. Any other simcha is out of place, not just marriage. But according to this opinion, that v'samachta b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha, it's only marriage which is an issue. Other simchas, other celebrations would be okay. But either way, says the Rashba, if it's based on v'samachta b'chagecha, there's another word. It only applies on a chag. Right, Rashi on the Rif gave one nafkamina, but other simchas. Says the Rashba, a different nafkamina. On which Yom Tovim does it apply? If it's ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, so then it's any day which is a day of simcha like Purim. But if it's v'samachta b'chagecha, the chag demands your simcha, then Purim's not a chag. By the way, neither is Rosh Hashanah. We don't say chag on chag Rosh Hashanah. There's a whole simon in the Tur. It's only a few lines. But the Tur brings, Alter Rebbe brings, that we don't say chag, and it's not a chag. And that's why there's no mitzvah minat Torah of simcha, because only v'samachta b'chagecha. Rosh Hashanah, there's no chi of simcha minat Torah. A lot to talk about that. We gave a half a shir about him, I think, right? We gave half a shir. We asked all the shilas. We never gave the answers. Because no one asked me what the answers were. Rabbi Eisel Chodef once went to yeshiva. He said, I'm going to ask a shaila. I'm going to ask a kasha. And whoever answers the kasha will get my daughter's hand in marriage. And he asked the Rabbi Eisel Chodef, very sharp man, very sharp. Misnagid too. He once said, well, you know why Chassidim walk around with gartelach? Like a apostle of Sefer Torah. He was very sharp. There was another one. He was speaking to a Chassidic Rebbe and says, how did you become a Rebbe? So the guy said, it's like Truma. You have a room full of produce. All the produce is the same. But you take some of it and you separate, you mafresh it becomes halik. So Taka, the Rebbe said, I'm like anybody else. But once the Chassidim separated, elevated me, I become halik. So Ba'azel said, yeah, but chayr shoyt to the cotton shetormu ain't trumas on truma. Not everyone's. Anyhow, so Ba'azel Chodef asked the kasha. He said, whoever answers the shaila will get my daughter's hand in marriage. No one knew the question. No one knew the answer. So he was disappointed. So he left and he went to his wagon outside. And as he's leaving town, he sees that there's a bocher running next to the wagon. So he stops the wagon. The bocher's out of breath. So he tells the bocher, no, you have an answer? So the bocher says, no, I don't, but I want to know what the answer is. Oh, you'll marry my daughter. If no one has the answer, second best is at least the guy that wants to know the answer, right? Anyhow, so we had half the shir. And I'm just harassing you. So, Purim is not a chag, neither is Rosh Hashanah, nor Yom Kippur. But Purim is mutter. Va'oid, the Havale Chad Yom, it's only one day. Mshid Chad Yom, Eloi Mashi Inish Nafshe. The Gemara gives a reason that if you're going to get if you're allowed to get married on Yom Tov, then you wouldn't get married in the summer. Let me just push it off till Sukkot, till Chol Moed Sukkot, when I'm off work anyhow. So you're not going to get married for months. You're going to push off the mitzvah of Pru Revu. Bitul Piri V'Rivya is one of the big reasons the Gemara says. So the Rabbi says that doesn't apply on Purim. You're not going to push off a wedding for a few months because you have one day off of work on Purim. You're not really cashing it in. For a 7-day Yom Tov with Chol, then you have something to cash it in for, right? The Rajba continues. Look at the last line. Ubinyanim elu holchin behem lahakol. In all of these inyanim, you're allowed to be mekel. De mider rabbanon heim. Watch the Rajba saying. The whole din of ein ma'arv and simcha b'simcha is the rabbanon. It's the rabbanon. The Rajba was a student of the Ramban. The Ramban said it's the rabbanon too. At least according to the Rishalmi. So the Rajba said it's the Rabbanon. But the Rajba allowed marriage on Purim. He doesn't deal with the issue of Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha. He quotes the other reason of a Samachta B'Chagecha and not your wife is not an issue of Purim. And then he says, and the Pru Revu issue won't apply either. He doesn't actually explain why Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha is a non-issue. There's a Chiyuv on Purim to be happy. It's more than just a Drabanon. It's from the Megillah, which is it's part of Tanakh. It's Divrei Kabbalah. From Tanakh, it's a Chiyuv from Tanakh. And Divrei Kabbalah, Divrei Torah Dami. They're compared to Darais on many levels. Many poskim hold on a mitzvah from Nach. On a suffix, you have to be machmer, like a Daraisa. You need to have Kavono Lotzeis, like a Daraisa. So the Simcha of Purim is not chopped liver. Like in the question he mentions, Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha, but in the Rajba's answer, what he does is he avoids that. He says, yeah, but according to the other opinions in Moed Katan, for example, you'll push off the wedding till Yom Tov, the Chaparayim, a week off, that's not an issue and it's one day. Or the issue of a Samachta B'Chagecha, V'loi B'Ishtecha doesn't apply in Purim. But he doesn't explain the reason of Ein Ma'arv and Simcha B'Simcha. So it seems like the Rajba holds that's not the real reason. That's not the real reason. Because if you look at number 11, the Magen Avraham in the Laws of Purim says The Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Kaira paskins like the Rashba, you're allowed to get married on Purim. So does the Rameh. Says the Magen Avraham in number 11, but if I have a kasha, this will be my kasha on the Rashba. Da Kaimelon, we do hold ein ma'arv and simcha b'simcha, like I wrote in Simon Tov Kuf Mem Vav, which is laws of Chol Hamoed, not getting married then. And we learn that from Sukkim. Se'im kein heyach, we're number 11. How are you allowed to mix the simcha of marriage b'simchas Purim? V'yesh loimer, that's why the Rashba finishes off with dvarim elu midrabanan hem. That since the whole issue is rabbinic, the whole chin lahakel. You know how the Magen Avraham understood the Rashba number 8? That according to the reason that you're going to push off the wedding till you have a whole Chol Hamoed, and you're not going to get married for months before, so that's not an issue for Purim, which is only one day. That's taka rabbinic reason. Or maybe v'samachta b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha is rabbinic according to the Rashba. Koloim, I mean the Magen Avraham, that what the Rashba means is the Laman da'amar ein ma'arvin, which according to him is Doraisa be'emes asur. The Magen Avraham learns the Rashba deliberately avoided the opinion of ein ma'arvin in his answer, because according to that opinion, it's not only it's a good kasha, it's a Doraisa dikadin, the Magen Avraham says, and you can't say, well, it's Rabbanan b'mekel. It's a full-fledged din, it's biblical, and you tak it's asur. The avol kivan deli idach shari halchin lahakel. But the Rashba says, let's follow the other opinions that say that according to them, so the im came, but couldn't Magen Avraham, but based on what I wrote in the laws of Chol Hamoed, that we hold of the reason of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha gam hacha asur, it's asur. Lachenirali, you get married on Yom Gimel, on the 13th of Adar, Erev Purim, and you can have the meal that night. You can get married Erev Purim. You can have the meal that night. You're mixing simchas of the wedding with Purim. The Iker Simcha of Purim is by day, right? If you only have your Sudas Purim the night before, you're not Yoitza. It has to be by day, and then that continues to the following night. But the night before you're supposed to eat something, some place can make a dafka don't eat, because if you eat, people might think that's the Iker Suda. So just break your fast, eat a little. The custom, though, is to have a Suda then, knowing, though, it's not the Iker Suda of Purim, and therefore that could be your Chasana Suda if you got married a couple hours before on Tainus Esther.
So it's his saying that the Rashba Dafka avoided in Marvin just because he knew that it was the Raisa? Because
the Rashba holds that's not the definitive reason of the Mishnah in Moed Katan. The Gemara gives a few reasons why not to get married on Yom Tov. The definitive reason is not Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. L'chayra, according to the Ramban in this week's parsha, the Ramban says even Ein Ma'arvin is only to Rabbanon. So the Rashba might just be learning like the Ramban. No, but the issue is even if it's the Rabbanon, the Rashba doesn't explain why it doesn't apply on Purim. The real issue with this Magen Avraham is he should ask the kasha much more head on. That Ein Ma'arvin would be a problem on Purim, not just because it's Doraisa. Even if it's the Rabbanon, there's no way to avoid it. Purim is a full-fledged Simcha. This issue was also discussed in number 9 in the Darchei Moshe. He quotes from the Hagoyis Maimonides that if there's a wedding on Purim, 10 people should come to read the Megillah in the house of the Chos and V'Kala. If they don't come, the Chos and Kala can read it themselves. They don't have to leave to go to shul. Beroi Vam Hadras Melech, no, Chos and Kala, they just got married. It sounds from Hagoyis Maimonides they got married on Purim. So that Amos says, hang on, the Kol Boy says, Tzorechiyun, if you're allowed to get married on Purim, because you can't mix Simcha b'Simcha. Or Dilmor, maybe the issue is only on Regalim, which is Doraisa. But Purim, which is only Divrei Kabbalah, maybe it's okay. Or we'll say, no, Rabbanons are sometimes just as strong as Doraisas. So you see how the Kol Boy asked the question of getting married on Purim? Yeah, Purim is a day of Simcha, but maybe the din of Ein Ma'arvin was only said if you're dealing with a Yom Tov Doraisa. So the Chayra, here's an interesting thing. The Ksav Sofer, the son of the Chsam Sofer, he believes that if you learn from the Yerushalmi that we learn from Shlomo HaMelech not to mix two joys. The two joys are both biblical. Sukkot is a biblical joy, and the joy of Binyan Beis HaMikdash. But it makes sense, you can't mix Binyan Beis HaMikdash and Sukkot. Sukkot is a deraisa dika simcha. Accordingly, says the Ksav Sofer, if you're dealing with a rabbinic joy, like Purim, it's taka divrei Kabbalah, so it's more than just rabbinic, but it's a tier below a full-fledged deraisa. Maybe you're allowed to get married on Purim. It's only like a case of Shlomo HaMelech of enjoying the Beis HaMikdash on Sukkot, when Sukkot is a full-fledged simcha. You can't bring Simcha B if you're already doing Simcha A, and Simcha A is biblical. But if Simcha A is less than biblical, like Purim would be okay. But says the Ksav Sofer, if you learn from Lavan was doing Shivas Yemei HaMishta, which is only Takon of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's the Rabbanon, right? Although it's Moshe, but it's not part of Tanakh. It was done by Moshe as a Chacham, not as Moshe as a Navi. He was wearing his rabbi hat, not his prophet hat. And because it's only the Rabbanon, and nonetheless, you can't do another Simcha together with it, then so too you can't get married on Purim. That's what the Ksav Sofer writes in a letter. That if you learn from Lavan, it's more severe. It's ironic because we learned in the Ramban in the beginning of this year, number 4, that Fakert, if you learn from Lavan, then the whole din is only D'Rabbanan. It's just that we hinged on the story of Lavan. The whole din is only D'Rabbanan. But if you learn from Shlomo, it's a biblical din. It's the other way around. It's much more severe if you learn from Shlomo. Right? So there's a little irony over there. Either way, back to the Darchei Moshe number 9. So he quotes the Kol Boy has a suffix. And then he quotes Rabbi Yisrael Berin, the Ma'ari Bruna, who says he writes clearly, it's also to get married on the 14th of Adar or the 15th, both by day and by night. And even on Tainus Esther, you shouldn't do it. Because when you're going to have your chasna meal, the night of Purim, he was very machmir, you shouldn't do it. The Goy's Maimon spoke about people that got married on Purim. No, they got married before Purim. The Sheva brachas continued on Purim, and for that we say, well, the Chas and Kala can stay home, they don't have to go to shul. So he quotes all of these shittas. The Rameh himself, he says something fascinating at the bottom of number 9. He thinks the main reason of not getting married on Yom Tov is not ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, it's v'samachta b'chagecha, with your Yom Tov, v'loi b'ishtecha, not your wife. And he says like this, every Yom Tov has their specific joy. Every Yom Tov has their specific joy you need to be happy with, right? So another joy is in conflict. But on Purim, what are you happy about? Nothing particular. It's Pasha a day just to be happy. On Yom Tov is a v'samachta b'chagecha. Your joy has to be focused on the Yom Tov. Another joy distracts you. However, on Purim, it doesn't say Purim v'samachta b'Purim. It says it's just Yemei Mishta v'Simcha. Be happy. Be happy with anything. Abi means zufrieden. Abi freilich. Just be happy. Fascinating. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach got married on Purim. Big Rav, he got married on Purim Meshulish, and he got married and he gave a drasha, and one of his drashas was how he was allowed to get married. And he said this word, that the issue of a samachta b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha is when the joy has to be about Yom Tov. So then your wife can be a wedding, a marriage, it's a different joy. But Purim, it doesn't say be happy with Purim. The mitzvah is just be happy. So anything you can't say is distraction. Distraction from what? I'm happy. Fascinating word from the Rambam. The pre-Chodosh in number 10. Now the pre-Chodosh was known as a warrior of a scholar, had no problem arguing with all of the Rabbanim before him. In fact, it got him into big trouble. He argues often on the Psakim of Rabbi Yosef Kaira. He was a Sfardish living in Eretz Yisrael in the end of the 1600s. Passed away young, 39. And the Pri Chodosh, he was cholik on quite a few Psakim of Rabbi Yosef Kaira. Among them was this, the Pri Chodosh Asher's getting married on Purim. The Beis Yosef was matter. So many were upset that the Pri Chodesh, this young guy, 100 years after the Beis Yosef, thinks he can just rock the boat and upschlag the Beis Yosef psakim. So in Egypt, they were furious. So they had a big meeting. They wanted to put the Pri Chodesh in Cherem. So they decided, though, we won't put him in Cherem, just his Sefer in Cherem. You couldn't learn Pri Chodesh in Egypt. The irony was that the Pri Chodesh's student, one of the Al-Ghazis, became the next chief rabbi of Egypt, and he implemented many of the psakim of his Rebbe. I think I told over that the Pri Chodesh, when he was about 39 years old, he had a dream. And he sees in his dream a prominent rabbi sitting on a cathedra, a fancy couch. And it was hovering in the air, and this rabbi was gazing at him very intently and sternly. So the Pri Chodesh asked someone next to him, who's that person? That's Rabbi Yosef Kaira. And he is very disturbed by how many times you knocked off his psakim. And the Pri Chodesh was afraid. So he asked for forgiveness, and Rabbi Yosef Kaira was meichel. And then he looks up and he sees somebody else sitting on the throne. And one by one, all these people that he had no problem arguing with, they were there ready to pounce, right? To cast a lightning bolt at him. And he asked for mechila. And they were meichel. Until the Levush of Mordechai Yaffa was sitting on the throne. Now the Pri Chodesh had been disrespectful. He used to call the Levush the tailor. The Levush, call him the tailor. And in one sugya he said here the tailor didn't know how to stitch. So he was... and he asked for the Levush for Mechila, and the Levush says, I'm not being Meichel. I'm not Meichel. And he woke up from his dream, and 3 days later he passed away, the Pri Chodesh, the age of 39. You don't mess with the Levush, right? The Shagasharya often argued on the Levush too. And he once had a dream. And the Shagasarya told the Levush, the pasuk says, Arya Shog mi lo yira. If the lion screams, who won't be afraid? And the Levush says, it says mi lo yira. Mi stands for Mordechai Yaffa. Mordechai Yaffa lo yira. I'm not afraid. Anyhow, okay. The Pri Chodesh though is talking in Hilchos Purim, not about getting married on Purim, but a Purim Mishulish, what do you do with the meal? A Purim Mishulish, which is Friday, right, in Yerushalayim, if Purim falls on Friday, so that's the 14th, Yerushalayim Purim is the 15th, so they celebrate 3 days Purim, Sunday as well. When is the Suda supposed to be? Who was a major machlokes in the Poskim 500 years ago? Rabbanim on all sides. Should it be Shabbos? Should it be Sunday? The Pri Chodesh holds actually both days. You have to have two Sudas, Shabbos and Sunday. And in number 10, he discusses that you know what the issue is of having the Sudas put him on Shabbos? Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You're mixing up two simchas. You're mixing up two simchas, the simcha of Purim feast with your Shabbos meal. There's no mitzvah to be happy on Shabbos. We all walk around depressed. There's no mitzvah to be happy on Shabbos, not so fast. The Sifri and Parshas Ba'aloischa. Uve Yom Simchaschem, Uve Mayadeichem, Uve Roshei Chodshechem. On the day of your happiness, on your Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, Uskatem b'chatzaitzis, below chatzaitzis. The Sifri says, Rosh Chodesh, I know what that is. Mayadeichem, I know what that is. But what's Uve Yom Simchaschem, your days of joy? It's separate to Yom Tov. Says the Sifri, Elu HaShabbos, Shabbos. And the pasuk says, Uve Yom Simchaschem. Elu HaShabbos, says the Sifri. The Shibolei Haleket, one of the Rishonim in Rome, he quotes from Rabbi Victor Katz that there's an Indian to be happy on Shabbos, and that's why we say Yismechu v'malchuscha Shem Shabbos. Yismechu v'malchuscha, Yismechu, Yismechu. For all the songs, right? Yismechu. The Sefer Hamanig, also from one of the Rishonim, he says that there was a minig not to say Tachnu on Friday morning. And he says Like Yom Tov, we never say Tachnun. The Shachris before Yom Tov, you don't say Tachnun. Not Pesach, not Shavuos, not Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Kippur, not Sukkot. We say Friday morning, that's our minhag. But there was a minhag back in the day not to. But right. But on Rosh Chodesh, Erev Rosh Chodesh, they said Tachnun in the morning. So the Sefer asks, what's the difference of Shabbos versus Rosh Chodesh? She says, what do you mean? Shabbos is a day of Simcha, and he quotes the Sifri. So this Sifri was quoted by Rishonim. It's serious stuff. It's true, the Rambam seems to hold there's no mitzvah. So the Rambam writes there's 4 things which are said about Shabbos. Zocher, Shomer, Kovod, and Oinig. He only mentions Simcha by Yom Tov. So there is a big debate. Yeah, so there's a debate if there's Simcha on Shabbos. If there is Simcha on Shabbos, so having your Purim Suda on Shabbos runs into the issue of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha b'Simcha. Anyhow, I'll leave what the Pri Chodesh number 10, you can read it yourselves. But ultimately, the Pri Chodesh says that you should have your meal on Shabbos. You should have the meal on Shabbos. But he does believe you should not get married on Purim. So as far as the Purim Suda on Shabbos, if you're living in Jerusalem, and the 15th of Adar falls on Shabbos, you should have your meal. For that's not a problem of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha b'Simcha. Maybe Shabbos doesn't really have Simcha. But when it comes to getting married on Purim, it's a violation of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha b'Simcha. That's the take of the Pri Chodesh. But upon him, the Ksav Sofer, like I mentioned, says it depends on if you learn like the Bavli Yisham. If you learn from this week, you learn from Lavan, the Simcha that Lavan did not want to infringe upon was only Sheva Brachas of Leah. That's only D'Rabbanan. Right? And Purim is Divrei Kabbalah is even greater. So if Yankov couldn't marry Rachel during the Sheva Brachas of Leah, you sure can't marry your wife during Simchas Purim. But if you learn from the Bavli, from Shloim HaMelech, he didn't want to let the Simchas Beis HaMikdash infringe on Sukkot, which is a Deraisa. It wouldn't apply to Purim. And I just said that L'chor, according to Ramban, it's fakert. If you learn from Shloim, the din is much more serious because then it's a Deraisa Dikadin. Fine. Here we come to Reb Menachem Azariah of Fano deals with the following shaila. When it comes to Kiddush Levana, when it comes to Kiddush Levana, anyone here ever did Kiddush Levana on Friday night? Anyone ever did Kiddush Levana? What? On Leil Yom Tov. I don't know, Leil Yom Kippur. First night of Sukkot, first night of Pesach, Leil Tesvav can be, depends when the Moiled was. If it's when you have, however long the month is, which is 29 and a half days, is the exact amount of the month, you divide that in half, that's exactly how much time you have from the Moiled till you can do Kiddush Levana. And then there were those that wanted to allow Leil Tesvav in any event, which was a big machlokes between the Chassidim and the Misnagdim 200 years ago. But what's the deal with doing Kiddush Levana on Yom Tov or on Shabbos? So you wonder what connection this has to our discussion. You'll see, fascinating. Join me in number 13. It all starts off with a Rashba, number 13. Masha Amar, let's skip number 12. Number 13. Masha Amarta, you say that you found from Rab Moshe of Kutzi. Rab Moshe of Kutzi is the famous Smag. The famous Smag. Lived in Kutzi in France, one of the Rishonim. He was involved in the big debate in France in 1242 that went sour, and 24 wagon loads of Sodom were burnt. Apparently the Smag said, Ein mevorchin birchas Havana, you don't do Kiddush Levana on Friday night. The Shema yesh tchumin l'mayla ma'asar. I'm going to do the best to explain this because I really don't understand it. The Gemara in Eruvin has a famous question about Tchumin, right? There's an Isser of Tchum, Shabbos and Yom Tov, you can't go too far. The Rif and the Rambam believe Tchum is Doraisa, But the Rif hold is only deraisa if you go 12 mil. You go very far, 12 mil. 12 kilometers, 24,000 amas, 12 mil, which was the size of the Jewish camp in the desert. And the 2,000 amas, the Rif hold, that's only drabanan. The Rambam writes the same thing in his halachas, although elsewhere the Rambam seems to write that even 2,000 amas could be deraisa. But both the Rif and the Rambam agree that there is some tchum which is deraisa. The Ramban and I think the Smag agrees to them as well. But the Ramban, the Rashba, the Rosh hold tchum is completely drabanan. It's completely rabbinic. The whole thing is drabanan. The Gemara in Erev wants to know, so tchum you can't walk too far, but what if you're above 10 tefachim from the ground? For example, if someone's flying, so the Rishonim say you're flying through using names of Hashem. That's magically flying, Kabbalistically, white magic. But what if you're above 10 tefachim from the ground? Because the Rishuyus of Shabbos, Rishus Harabim, doesn't extend beyond 10 tefachim from the ground. So maybe tchumen, and the Gemara says, or if you're in a boat, if a boat goes on water, you measure from the bottom of the boat to the seabed, and if there's more than 10 tefachim of water, so the boat is like flying. The water is not the ground. The water is like air, Just like somebody flying between you and the ground, there's air, so to a boat in the water, between the boat and the seabed, there's water, which is like air, right? It's oxygen, there's a little bit of hydrogen, or a lot of hydrogen. But, so Taka, the Gemara wants to know, is there tchumen if you're above 10 tefachim? The Gemara ends off, it's a suffix. It's a suffix. So says the Smag, you can't do Kiddush Levana Friday night. Because maybe there's tchum above 10 tefachim. You're like being makabel, right? When you Kiddush Levana, you're makabel pnei shchina. Yeah. That's why we do it standing up. Right? We're saying Kiddush Levana that if only once a month we makabel the Eibish's face would be kedai. Kiddush Levana, you think you're talking to the moon? You're praising the Eibush for the moon. You're talking to God. But the moon's far away. Okay? So you're makabel the face of your master, l'mayla ma'asara. What does this mean? Like, how is there tchum when you're... Let's say the Eibush is on the moon. Let's say you're talking to the moon. What's the word of the tchum? You're not going out of the tchum. Like, he's worried maybe there's tchum above 10. Let's say there's for sure is tchum above 10. Who's going anywhere? You're just talking. Are you allowed to walk to the edge of Tchum, have your Rebbe beyond the Tchum and speak to him? You're allowed to do. We don't find any prohibition. You're allowed to be Makabel the Pnei Rabbi Chutz Tchum. So, what this is all about is very strange. Many people talk about it, and everyone's a little bit perplexed. The Sha'alto, the Rashba says, you ask me, what do I say about this? Tshuv, says, Le'ikr tchumin. So he says, first of all, the main understanding is of Das Rabboisai, tchumin does not exist above 10 tefachim. Why? Because the Rashba holds like the Ramban, his Rebbe, and the Rosh, that tchumin b'chalal is only Drabanan. And since the Gemara has a suffix if it exists above 10, it's a suffix dera banan. V'chol suffix and drabanan, you can be mekel. V'afil lechatchila, which we don't usually say. Usually we say that a suffix drabanan you shouldn't lechatchila. Right? Like we have by Sfira Sa'imer, even though today it's only drabanan, you shouldn't lechatchila count during Bein Hashmashas, even though it's only drabanan, maybe it's night, because we don't want to lechatchila. Right, Al Rebbe is a Kuntra Sachrin about carrying on, checking your pockets before you go out on Shabbos. But what if you're only walking in a Carmelus? So it's Drabanan. Maybe I have some in my pocket, maybe not. It's only a suffix on a Drabanan. The Al Rebbe says you can't enter that lechatchila, but the Rashba here says clearly you can. Fine, but so he says B'chlal there's no tchumen above 10. And then he says I B'chlal have another way of explaining the Gemara in Erevin. He says, you have my book, Avodas HaKodesh, you also have my Chidushim on Erevin, L'sham timsar, there you find everything you want. He says, Mikol Mokum, concerning benching the Levana, Lo yadaiti, I don't know, ma inyan zeh shel tchumen bebirchas halvana. He says, what is this talking about? V'chim lo yoye be'efshel lahakbel pnei rabel mercha gadol shiyeh b'neim, lo yekabel ponav. Simply translated, that means, if the only way you could be makabel the face of your Rebbe is mimercha gadol, from a big distance between you and him, you can't do it. No one's going beyond the tchum. Who cares that you're greeting someone who is beyond the tchum? If no one walks beyond the tchum, what's the problem? Skip a line. V'oid, the bench, you're not benching to the moon, you're benching to the Eibishter. The Eibishter is not l'mayla ma'asara. And he's not l'mayla from tchum either. He's l'mayla mikol ze ilui rav. The Eibishter is beyond everything. We're makabel the pnei shchina bedimyan halvana. All right, that when you look at the moon and you think the Eibishter created it or mechadish it, and it doesn't change its tafkid, so that's when you look at it and you marvel about the Eibishter's creation, then you marvel about the Eibishter alein. He said, "Va'oid yesh bo ze inyan pnimi." There's an inyan pnimi. L'misha zicheyo Hashem lamed alav. For someone who's worthy, the Eibishter made worthy to be omed alav. So there's a Kabbalistic secret over here. But he doesn't say about what. A Kabbalistic secret about what Kiddush Levana is about, or about why we don't do it Friday night. Unclear. Is he saying there's a Kabbalistic secret of why you don't do Friday night, or is he saying a Kabbalistic secret of what the Kiddush Levana is all about? He says, B'chlal, though I looked at the smag of Moshe Mikutzi, I don't see this whole thing about this tchum when you look at the moon. He says it could be that somebody made a kitzer of the smag, and often when people make a kitzer, right, you're supposed to be, it's shorter than the original. Somehow you stick in new things that weren't in the original. Because of Cain Matzim. This is the Rajba's famous letter. And since then, everyone's trying to figure out what does it mean that there's an issue of tchum when you mekadosh levana. If you look at number 14, the Radvaz was asked about this as well. Sha'alta, you asked, why don't we bench on the moon Friday night? L'chayra, Friday night is perfect time to be mekabel pnei shechina like any time. The gam hu mevusim. Meaning it says in Masechta Seifrim, you should do Kiddush Levana Mitzvah Shabbos because you're mevusim. You're in a good mood, you're spiced up. So the Radvaz says, Friday night is even better than Mitzvah Shabbos. Everyone's in a good mood Friday night. So Tshuva, so he says in number 14, Ra'isi b'tayma shel dover, I saw some explain that maybe there's tchumen above 10. V'have ke'ilu halach lahakbil chutz l'tchum. So when you address the moon, or the Eibishter about the moon, if there's tchumen above 10, you're in hot water, because it's like you went chutz l'tchum, reaching out to the moon. And therefore we don't bench on Friday night or Yom Tov. Says Radvaz v'kama cholush, this is such a weak reason, doesn't make any sense. He says, you know what I say the reason is? Because Friday night, when Makabel, the face of the king, Kiddush Hayoim, the melech, the masculine, the Zoh, V'hu shas hazivuk, it's a time of spiritual intimacy between the Eibishter and Yidden, where the Kala, the Eibishter, is the melech. The lav oirich ara lahakbel pnei hashchina ba'isar shah. To distract yourself from Makabel, the pnei hashchina, which is Malchus, that's not the right time. But Mitzvah Shabbos, it is the right time. Because we escort the king B'Havdalah, so the king is leaving, the Melech is leaving, Zoh is leaving. Then it's Roy to Makabel Pnei Shchina, which is because Mishum da Ozlon Lo Nefesh Yisera. Not only the king is going, but you're losing the Nefesh Yisera. Right? You need some comfort. You need comfort, consolation. This is a perfect time, Makabel Pnei Shchina. You're not busy with the king anymore. And Fakert, you have this hole you have to fill. Lisuvidaito lefaisa, to appease your neshama that remains from the extra nefesh that's left. That's what the Radvaz says. So knowing that background, we come to number 15. Reb Menachem Azaria of Fanu, and he says like this. It's in his Tshuvas, Shailas at Tshuvas Rameh MiFano. He says, you ask about what it says in Masechtas Sofrim. It says we don't bench on the moon except Mitzvah Shabbos when you're Mavusam. So it's from Masechtas Sofrim from a long time ago, which is from the Masechtas Ktanis, the small Masechtas printed in the back of Masechta Avodah Zarah. So then why not Friday night or Yom Tov? Because a person is even more in the mood and sanctified. The Kabul Pnei Shechina, there's no better time than Friday night, like the Radvaz asked. Says the Rameh, Kadmoneinu Omru, our predecessors said, we're worried about maybe this Tchumen above 10. So it says in Sefer Aguda, it also says in the Maharil, so in all these Ashkenazis for them. Pirush L'Divreim. Now, I'll read what he says, and if you can figure it out, good. Ki Govu Shamayim L'Roim. The heaven is very far from the earth. Mahalach Tov, 500 years of travel, it says in the Chagiga. Me'oim Mekaretz Halizu. From the ground to the heaven is very far. Hine, haflogas hamerchik. When there's such a distance from Min America's la'agula, from the center to a circle around it, right? So you have a dot and you have a circle around it. If you draw two lines from that dot in the middle, so the two lines start off very close to each other, but as they go further and further, as they go, they get further and further from each other. And when they both reach the circle that surrounds the dot, they are now very distant from each other. That's what he says. Mina Americas from the dot, from the center, Lagula, to the circle around, the distance, goyim, it causes lekavim yisharim, for straight lines, hamurumamim, which are going high, mikan, from the center, l'sham, to the edges, a richuk atzum, a huge difference. When they both hit the end, there's a huge distance. But when they began, when they reach the heavens, the two lines are extremely distant. Even though Ein B'Neim Etzal Americas, although by the center, there's just a hairbreadth between them. Okay, that's what he says. Okay, that's true. So what's the word? If you view yourself above, you're standing, right, doing Kiddush Levana. If you view yourself above 10 tfachim, b'nekuda hanochachis, in the current nekuda, al roshay, on your head. So when you go klape hayareach, when you go towards the moon to bench to its former, it looks like you're yotze chutz l'tchum. Because you're standing over here, the moon's over here, you're here, your head's over here. If you would draw a line above your head, it goes all the way here. The moon's all the way here. So for you to go from there to there, it looks like you're yotze chutz l'tchum. That's what I don't know. I'm not sure what it's all about. However, the Rameh continues, this is the reason why we're quoting this. The kivan the odif kavod Shabbos. You know what kavod Shabbos is all about? Kala Malkasa. Shabbos is a queen. Shabbos Alein is a queen. And Kedushas Yom Tov Gamkein. Both of them are greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Levana. Shabbos and Yom Tov are greater than Kiddush Levana. So ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You can't do Kiddush Levana Friday night or Yom Tov by night because you're mixing two simchas together. But it's good b'mitzvah Shabbos, b'mitzvah Yom Tov. Like mitzvah Shavuos, mitzvah Yom Kippur, you want to go Michael al Chayil. And when you makabel the Shechina by Kiddush Levana, there's a nachas ruach, because you lose the neshama yisera, and this causes a comfort. And at that time, we're mavusam because we just accompanied the king. I guess on Shabbos that applies. So this is the Rameh MiFano's letter. So there was a great man whose name was Reb David Oppenheim. Reb David Oppenheim was a rabbi in Prague. In the end of 1600s, early 1700s. He was a brother-in-law of the Shavus Yaakov. Actually, when Reb David Oppenheim was very ill, so the communal leaders entered his room and says, Rebbe, what should we do if you go? Who should lead us? He said, Rab Meir. And with that, he passed away. And from that point on, many wanted to get the job of chief rabbi of Prague, but the community wouldn't let them because their name wasn't Meir. Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz was there. He was not the chief rabbi of the city. His name was Yonason, not Meir. So along came the Noid Yehuda, Rabbi Yechezkel Landa, as a candidate for the chief rabbanus. So the board said, listen, you're a great scholar, but your name's not Meir. He said, what are you talking about? So they told him the story that Reb David Oppenheim, the previous rabbi, was already a couple decades before, said the next rabbi should be Meir. So the Noib Yehuda says, you misunderstood what he meant. Reb David Oppenheim was very ill. He was a goisus. He was teetering between life and death. Most goisusim die. Most people in such a condition don't recover. Some people do. You asked him, Reb David, who should be the next leader? You're treating him as if he's a goner. So he said Rab Meir. Rab Meir's opinion in Gemara is to always be chayshish for the miut. Rab Meir is always concerned for the minority. What the Rabbi David Oppenheim was saying is, don't write me off like I'm gone, you follow the majority. Rab Meir is chayshish for the miut. That's what he meant. So they liked the Vort, they liked the Vort so much that nobody got the job. My father Tainus, what Reb David Oppenheim meant when he said Rab Meir, wasn't the Vort that why are you writing me off? Since Rab Meir is chayshish for the miut and some goyses recover, so why are you writing me off? He was answering their question of who should be the next rabbi. The board was asking him, the people, who should be the next leader? He said, you need someone like Rab Meir, who's chayshish for the miut. Because often in communities, you have people that are on the side, that they're the minority, they get neglected on the side, and nobody looks at them. A real Rav has to be like Rab Meir. He has to be concerned for the minority, the outsiders, the outcasters. That's the type of Rav that you need. Either way, Reb David Oppenheim has a very, very long letter printed in the Shvus Yankov of his brother-in-law, Reb Yankov Reisher. It's a very long letter, and he goes through all the reasons of why one would not make Kiddush Levana Friday night, and he throws them all out the window. And he quotes the Rameh MiFano. So he says, first of all, this doesn't work. So he has a whole thing about this whole tchum l'mayla ma'asara. He can't figure out what this means about, and if he couldn't figure out, how am I going to figure it out? It's so bizarre, the whole tchum l'mayla ma'asara. What does it mean? But what about the ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha? She says, first I won't apply for Shabbos. That won't apply Friday night. There's no mitzvah of simcha Friday night. And then Rameh MiFano says he's using the word of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha for Friday night. But there's no simcha on Shabbos. So for that we'll say not so fast. There's the Sifri, there's the Sefer Amanik, the Shabali Alecha. We quoted the sources that say there is a mitzvah to be b'simcha on Shabbos. But the other, David Oppenheim's time is you can't apply ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. He thinks that this is not the ultimate reason for the halacha. Just like the Rashba in his letter seemed to say, this wasn't the real reason why you don't get married on Yom Tov. The Gemara in Metzchatin gave many reasons. This was one of them. In fact, the Rambam has a well-known contradiction. That in one place he quotes the reason ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha about not getting married on Chol HaMoed. Elsewhere he quotes the other reasons of v'samachtu b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha. That's a long, long discussion what Pshat the Rambam is. But either way, Dr. Oppenheim says that according to the other v'samachtu b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha, that would have wouldn't apply on Shabbos. Shabbos is not a chag, and he doesn't accept this word that Rameh MiFano. Comes Reb Osher Weiss. By the way, the Shvus Yankov himself has a short response to his brother-in-law who wrote pages and pages. David Oppenheim wrote pages and pages why he wants to allow it. He says all the reasons given are not convincing. He wants to allow Kiddush Levana Friday night. He says the whole reason not to do it, he says it's all wrong. So the Shvus Yankov says that I hear what you're saying, but this is a minig shenogu klal Yisrael. Just because each of the reasons that I brought, you can throw a wrench into the mix, is not going to unravel the entire minig. However, he says, Taka, if it's the last night, like it's Leil Tesvav, it's the last night you could do it, then he would allow. Comes Reb Osher Weiss. Reb Osher Weiss Tainas, He doesn't understand why the Rameh MiFano is mixing Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha, which was said about getting married on Yom Tov, to this issue over here of saying Kiddush Levana on Shabbos or Yom Tov. And Rav Asher Weiss wants to time it like this. The issue of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha is only if the second joy, it may be a mitzvah, but there is a physical pleasure. There's a festivity, like making a simcha for a chasana. And even if there's no simcha, if there's no suda, there is a big debate in the poskim. What if someone gets married on Chol Hamoed? I'm not making a suda. So some allowed it, and others said, no, you can't, because the marriage itself is so joyful. Who cares? You reserved a hall, and there were $50,000 worth of flowers there, and there was open bar, and there was music and dancing, and Even if you had none of that, it's still simcha. The very fact you have a new wife, it's great. It's a big bracha. The Gemara says in Yevamos, without a wife, you don't know true simcha. Hashori b'lo yisha, shori b'lo simcha. So it's a joy, a physical joy. There's a mitzvah in getting married too, but there's also a physical joy to it. There's two elements. There's actually another tshuva, the Shvus Yankiv, where he says that getting married to someone just because you like the way they look, he said it's also. But if you're getting married because there's a mitzvah to get married, once I'm getting married, I'll get married to the person who I admire the way they look the most. Then it's okay. Then you have two elements. But Rav Asher Weiss tainas that when there's a physical geschmack in what you're doing, a physical festivity, then it's a disturbance to the Simcha of Yom Tov. But if all you're doing is another mitzvah, and the joy is from the mitzvah, how could different mitzvahs collide with each other? You can't give tzedakah to someone on Chol Hamoed and do it b'simcha, because ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. How could you mix those two things? Doesn't make sense. If it's a simcha shel mitzvah, all simcha shel mitzvah is the same. All simcha shel, because a milah is bezmana, what are you going to do? A pidyon haben is bezmana. There's a shayla though about if it's not bezmana taka, about the suda. But Rabbi Asher Weiss time is that the simcha of Kiddush Levana is not a physical pleasure, it's a spiritual pleasure. You're makabel pnei shchina. Why can't you do that on Yom Tov? In fact, Reb David Oppenheim wants to know, on Yom Tov the Yidden were oil the regel. Yeiror kol schurchen. The Gemara says, Chagiga, they came to see God, they came to be seen by God. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Rubbish. So for that you'll say, that's a mitzvah of Yom Tov. It's like on Pesach, you can't enjoy the matzah you eat because it disturbs the simcha of Yom Tov. The matzah is part of Pesach. Aliyah l'regel is a mitzvah of Yom Tov. But David Oppenheim says that he uses an example. If the Kabbalah's Pnei Shchin of Aliyah l'regel doesn't interfere with your simcha of Yom Tov, why would your simcha of Kiddush Levana? It's also Kabbalah's Pnei Shchin. That's what the happiness is. And yes, Asher Weiss believes that the Rameh MiFano is inappropriately applying the rule of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. There's no physical pleasure, it's a Simcha Shel Mitzvah. All Simcha Shel Mitzvah should be able to go together. So if you look in number 16, there's a Sikha this week, famous Sikha, but the Rebbe says like this, in Tchunas HaNefesh, a person can have two svaras when it comes to piling Simchas upon each other. Number one, B'shas HaMensch is in a certain mood, like the Tnuah of Simcha. So although the Simcha came from a certain Bashtim Tanin, from whatever it came from, but nonetheless it helps, whatever Simcha you add, noch besser. The more joy, the better. So more celebrations happen to coincide, noch besser. All the joy can stack upon each other, because it's all the Zelba Tnuah of joy. Beis, you could say, fakert. When a man steht in a Tnuah from Simcha, for whatever reason, so not only that another Simcha won't help it, fakert, another Simcha will disturb it. Both of them have the same Musuvavim, the resultaten, they both have the same results of Simcha, but they come from different sources. And the source of the simcha plays a big role in the joy you actually feel. And two different simchas from two different sources don't work together. Ubemela, the mavalva, one's mavalva the other. Just like the sources are different, it's going to affect the result as well. The simcha is it's a different color simcha, different taste of simcha, because it comes from a different source. Und das lernt man up von dem Pasuk Mali Shvu Azois. What we learn is you don't mix them together, that is the Tzveite Svara. Even though by Lavan the two simchas were of the same nature, marriage, doesn't matter. The source is from a different woman, it affects the type of joy. Ubemele Weisman dem Dim von ein Marvin Simcha. But the Rebbe is learning that the Rebbe here is explaining that we learn the nature of people from Lavan, and then Alain statement that, well, if it's going to disturb, you don't put them together. So the Rebbe is learning that even though the two simchas are very similar, it's Leah, it's Rachel, it's marriage though, doesn't matter. It comes from a different source, even though the source is a different person. The simcha is a different simcha. So l'chayr, you could say that even if you have two simchas and both of them are shel mitzvah, but if they come from a different mitzvah, the source is if it's a different type of simcha. I'll prove it to you. Because Taisus we saw in number 7 compares ein marvin simcha simcha to ein oisim mitzvahs chavilas. By ein oisim mitzvahs chavilas, we're talking about mitzvahs. We're not talking about physical sensations. It's mitzvahs. And nonetheless, each mitzvah needs its own, its full concentration, its full devotion, commitment, undivided attention. And Taisus, so too by simcha, each one needs its own attention. So just because you have a simcha shel mitzvah, a simcha shel mitzvah over there, each one needs its own, just like ein mitzvah chavilas, you can't pile mitzvahs. Taisus is saying clearly, you can't pile mitzvahs together if you're going to have two different simchas. Either two simchas are so similar, but the Rebbe says we learn from Lavan that no. If it has a different source, the two simchas disturb each other. So l'cha'era, according to that, the Rameh MiFano is right in saying that Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina, by Kiddush Levana, it comes a different source of simcha. So it disturbs Friday night Shabbos, it disturbs Yom Tov. Okay, we're going to end over here. Yishukayach. The mice of Meir Premishlana proves there was the simcha of Yom Tov. What was the other simcha about the illness of his daughter? There's no physical pleasure over there. You have to be makabel the Eibish's judgment. The Gemara says b'toich simcha. The simcha just t'chveis that you're in the hands of the Eibish. It's a simcha shel mitzvah. And nonetheless, Rab Meir said ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, which proves against Rab Asher Weiss, which proves just like the Rameh MiFano. And now we are done.